All right. Well, today we were talking to Brittany, and I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about you, Brittany, what you do, and how you're helping the therapist community. But before we get there, why don't you tell us just a little bit more about who you are and what you do? And as I said before I hit record, I love to hear people's stories. So tell us a little bit more about how you got started doing what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, my name's Brittany. I am based out of North Dakota. It's 5 degrees here right now. It is very cold. Um,
Wow.
uh, but I'm a mental health therapist. I'm a group practice owner. I started going into private practice about 8 years ago. And then, about 2 years after I started private practice, I started just kind of slowly dipping my toe into group practice. Now we have a group practice of 10 clinicians and 2 locations in North Dakota. We have a really great admin staff that honestly I couldn't do the group practice work without. A couple more things. My husband works here too, which is pretty special. I have heard in your podcast too that your wife's a therapist, and it's
Yeah.
pretty cool to be able to do work alongside the special people in our lives. So
Yeah.
that's one of the fun facts of Solace Counseling.
Awesome.
I come from a small business owner family. My husband also owns a small lawn care company. And you'll probably hear more of my story later on, but my husband owning a small business was really helpful in opening my small business. Uh, just some of the nitty-gritty details that I wouldn't have known really how to get started. So that
Mm,
was a really helpful piece of my past.
yeah.
My husband and I have 4 kids. Our youngest is 5 months old, and our oldest
Oh,
is 10.
wow.
Yeah, yes. And a big piece of day-to-day life truly is figuring out that work-life balance and
Yeah.
how do you create that? And,
Hmm.
what does it look like when you own a couple businesses in our family? So they're very,
Yeah.
very special.
Awesome. Yeah, we have some of that going on too. We have two boys, 7 and 3, 3.5. And those are our typical conversations of just balancing life and oh, there's this special thing going on at this school and or I need to schedule this thing, but I forget and so I don't block it out in my schedule. Yeah, stuff like that. Totally
Yeah.
get it.
We always call it divide and conquer in our house. And
Yeah.
we always, my husband and I are often asking each other, like, when's the not divide and conquer time? When's the whole family time and when's the divide and conquer? Because
Yeah.
it can be just so tricky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a couple other small things about me. I am in the Air National Guard. I've been enlisted for 18 years and I'm
Wow.
so excited to retire in about a year and a half,
Oh, wow.
uh, which was a decision I made when I was very young. We make lots of decisions when we're young, and thankfully that was a good decision that I made. But I'm excited for that chapter to close out and for new chapters to open. But I am very, very proud of the people that I have been able to serve alongside and the ability to do that.
Yeah. Wow. That's great.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
cool. Well, today we are talking about our topic today is the five biggest financial mistakes as a
yeah,
$1.5 million group practice owner.
yeah,
And I'm sure that title kind of grabs attention. Maybe there's people who clicked on this and are listening to this because, maybe they can't even imagine having a group practice of 1.5 million, or maybe they are in a group practice that is close to that, and so they're here to kind of commiserate or just learn a little bit about your experience. So take us into this. What's the first mistake you made?
yeah. So my number one mistake, which was, well, I've made far more than five, first of all.
I make
Um,
a mistake every day in my business, so
I know I was gonna say I probably made over five just from since waking up this morning. So I tried to pick the five mistakes that truly were the most long-term impactful for me.
yeah.
So I don't want this to seem like only five mistakes. No, there's so many more, but I hope
Hmm.
people can glean just some help from these some of the big five mistakes that I've made. So the first one and probably the most long-term problematic one was overcompensating employees from the
Mm.
beginning. So, um, in I think there's a lot of different compensation structures and a lot of different reasons why people choose the compensation structure they do. And I am definitely not here to pick which one is right for each person. I think it also has a lot to do with the area we're in and what is kind of common practice around us.
Right.
But when I opened my private practice, I came from a group setting kind of where they were doing splits with contractors, and it was a 70-30 split where I
Mm.
came from. And so when I opened my practice and started considering group practice, I had thought, I want to do it different in a way that I want employees, but I also want to be competitive in the market. So I didn't do probably anywhere near enough research, and I had a lack of confidence at that point. So it felt
Mm.
like I'm not established in this community. Who's going to want to come work for me? I need to be
Right.
at the high end, you know?
Mm.
So when I opened, I did a 60-40 split with employees, and it was far too high for successful practice for me. So I I have some numbers just to kind of get people thinking of what that might look like. And again, I'm talking about an employee structure. So this is what comes in for an employee structure. If you're talking about contractor, I haven't done it. So that will be a totally different structure.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I think a good thing to think of when you have employees right from the start and you're trying to figure out if you do a split or if you don't, if you're figuring out what do I pay salary or per session, is
Hmm.
to think of some of the basic expenses that are going to come into play right off the bat. So when you have an employee, right away you're going to pay about 7.5% in taxes for them. Out of an employee's paycheck comes 7.5% in expenses, and out of the business side. This is a rough estimate. It's actually a decimal, and I'm not quite sure what the decimal is, 7 point blah blah blah,
Yeah.
but 7.5 for ease of
Hmm.
sake. So you have 7.5% taxes for your employee, and then also as a individual, you're going to pay about 15% in taxes. Again, rough estimate, work with your payroll or work with your accountant on that. But that's a pretty good about estimate is 15%. So right off the bat, before any expenses are even paid, you're at 22.5% in taxes.
Mm.
And I think even that number is just really important to hear and hold on to because now your 60-40 split just became a 60-17 split.
Mm. Yeah.
And now your basis overhead that you have for expenses and making it worthwhile for your time is 17%, which is not a whole lot of money to spend. I did pull some statistics of like what is a good profit margin and
Hmm.
where should that number be? And of course, these are generalized, but overall, a strong profit margin is between 20 and 30%.
Hmm.
Average is 10 to 20, and under 10% is not sustainable.
Hmm.
So you can hear in the numbers I'm giving you, I was starting off without paying any expenses at a average profit margin, but I hadn't paid any expenses yet.
Right.
So I would say my biggest mistake was hiring that structure in that way. And then now we start thinking about the expenses of, average amount we're paying billers is about 7%. We're typically spending 7 to 10% on marketing. And then you just go from there. You have office space, EHRs.
Right.
And so you guys can hear my profit margins dwindling, but I didn't have the insight or the knowledge at that time to understand like that was it was not feasible for
Hmm.
me. So that is the mistake that I would say has hurt me for the longest period of time because it
Hmm.
is really hard to start hiring people at that amount and then to start trying to come back from that paying on different structures or paying different amounts. You start to get known for, oh, that's a place that hires a 60-40 split or whatever that split looks like for an
Yeah.
individual. And so, I specifically remember my heart just kind of sinking in an interview when we had a really great candidate and it was coming towards the end and they had asked about our pay structure and at that time we had switched to salary and you could just see when she had asked about the pay structure and I had said we hire on a salary model, you could see in her the disappointment and
Mm.
I just felt so icky and
Mm.
so terrible. So it's a piece that was a very expensive mistake to make and it also is hard to compete. I kept hearing other people paying on specific pay structures, and I felt like, well, that's what I have to do to compete. And it's a really tough place to be. So my best piece of advice for this number one is to get with somebody that you trust that is in this business that can help walk you through like what are the average percentages for things in your area and really see what your profit margin would look like. And, just using as a guide, a strong profit margin is between 20 to 30, averages 10 to 20. And if you're already starting off below 10%, it's just truly not a sustainable practice likely.
Yeah, yeah, that's so important, and then that's where I often hear we didn't go to school and get business ownership degrees and all this stuff. So
Yeah,
just like you said, I mean that's similar to what my wife did when she started her practice. It's like I've got this history with another practice, and this is how we did it. So it will likely work, to do it this way, and then as you get deeper into it, you start then being able to hire like a bookkeeper or an accountant, and then they kind of shine a little bit of light on it, and you slowly kind of peel that back, like, oh, I've got to change the structure because as the business grows, the expenses grow, and
yeah,
it can get really hard. And I remember that that time when my wife was in that where it was like I feel like I should be making more than I actually am, and you
yes.
start to realize, oh, okay, there's something going on here with the structure, and if that's tweaked, then things can be a lot better for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's probably an area that if we got 100 group practice owners together, we would
Mm,
probably all commiserate a little bit on it. And I
mm,
specifically remember at one point in time asking myself, like, how is it like this? Because if I see less clients, I actually am going to be making less than the clinicians are. And
right.
so then it got to the point where in order for me to financially be where I was at in private practice, I needed to see almost the same number of clients. But I had this huge, heavy burden of administrative stuff where
Yeah.
like clinicians
Yep.
need consultation now, or, there's a legal question about an ROI that just got turned in, or um, somebody hasn't paid their bill. Are we going to do collections or not? And
Yeah.
all of these, or somebody filed bankruptcy. What do we do with that amount? And so there became, I don't want to say resentment because I don't think it was that strong, but fear probably of
Yeah.
like, what did I just create or what did I
Hmm.
just do? And it goes back to the beginning where we were talking about family and just how important work-life
Yeah.
balance is. And I
Hmm.
realized I got myself in a spot where work-life balance wasn't real at that
Yeah.
point and that
Yeah.
I needed to make some big changes. But this was a really hard one to come back from and
Yeah.
still is a big pressure point because there's a lot of places in our community that still do hire on a split. And so sometimes it feels like I'm competing in a way that is really hard to compete.
Yeah.
But knowing, deep down inside and having lived this honestly and feeling the pain of it is the reminder we can't hire like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Well, what is mistake number two that you have for us?
Yeah, mistake number two, you can probably hear it in number one, is not seeking business consultation.
Mm,
So I think like, there's a lot of reasons for this, but I think one of the couple reasons that I'd like to talk about is I grew up in a home where there really wasn't extra money to hire people to do things. And so like plumbing's broke, dad's gonna try and fix it. Heater's
right.
broke, dad's gonna try and fix it. And so reaching out to outside services was just it sounds kind of bizarre to say it, but it almost like wasn't even an option for
Yeah.
a while for me, where I just thought like, well, what you have to do is just kind of figure it out,
Figure it
make
out.
mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Bootstrap it.
Yes, make mistakes, do the time and effort, and so I think that was a piece of just that's the first thought that came to mind was figure it out yourself.
Yeah.
I think the second piece of it was that I didn't quite know where to find what I was looking for, and I didn't want to get myself in a position of feeling embarrassed. So what I mean by that is I had started hearing of practices or people that were offering consultation, but I assumed it was going to be at this really high dollar amount. I didn't have the confidence it was going to be the right fit for me, and I was super scared that I was going to go in knowing nothing and then
Mm,
hear the price and have to say like, "Oh my gosh, I'm really sorry, I can't afford that." So there were a lot of fears probably of not reaching out for a consultation on the business side. And another piece is I felt like I didn't even know what I didn't know to ask.
right.
And so just a lot of fears. I think seeking business consultation would have probably been pretty stinking helpful.
Yeah.
Um, and then also a piece of I was a little bit nervous to ask, people in the community that looked like they were probably doing it successfully because I was worried about being a burden.
Mm.
So all of those things going together
Yeah.
contributed to me not seeking business consultation, but I wish I would have.
Yeah, there's so much of ourselves and our past and our hangups or fears that gets wrapped into business ownership. And I mean, it totally resonates with me and my own story of business growth. And you just kind of, I'm just going to figure it out, you know? And so you spend hours trying to figure something out when you could have really saved a lot of time and money if you were able to, you know, connect with someone who's been there, done that, has the resources, you know. But I totally, you know, I totally understand those fears that you have going into that. And it's just when you look back now, especially after you know, you've been at it for many years, you know, I'm sure it feels like, oh, why didn't I do that sooner? I mean, you just told us why, but you know, it's just like I wish I could have
Yeah,
seen that. I wish I could have seen that earlier and gotten my own, you know, seeked my own you know, help to overcome these things.
yeah, yep, I totally agree. It's interesting how much of like our own stuff can get, and I don't mean own stuff in a bad way, but like
Right.
our own stuff can get in the way of us moving forward. Because myself now can tell myself back then, like, hey, you're fine.
Hmm.
Everybody, gets in this position where they need
Yeah.
some help, and there's people who are grateful to provide it. But
Yeah.
my myself then just didn't know that. So
Right. Right. Well, what was mistake number three?
yes, mistake number three, and probably a fear for lots of people, not saving enough or properly for taxes.
Yeah, that
So,
comes up a lot.
yes, oh my goodness. And I think even the people that are saving enough still have a fear that they're not saving enough for
Yeah.
taxes.
Yeah.
So I have some helpful advice for this one. I'll talk about what happened to me first, and then I can give that helpful piece of advice. But we do have an accountant who is really wonderful and great and does a great job of predicting what things are going to look like for us. And we submit quarterly tax estimates through her
Hmm.
that she comes up with. However, there's no 100% guarantee of what that's going to look like. So I specifically remember this was 3 years ago. We were at our tax appointment before the end of the year, just making sure we were on track. And she had told us that we had a little over 20,000 extra dollars that we needed to pay for our last quarterly payment. And my heart just sunk and I felt sick because I knew what that meant. And what that meant was one, money was coming out of savings, but two, I was not going to be able to pay myself for the month of December.
Mm.
And we can all hear the month of December is a tough month to not pay yourself.
Yeah.
And I said, previously, my husband and I both own small businesses. So it was a really scary place to be and a really sad place to be to know
Yeah.
the impacts that that was going to have.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So, my help with that, if you will, is there was a book that I had read towards the beginning of being in practice, and it was called Profit First. And
Hmm.
there's now a therapist version of Profit First out there that I have begun, but I haven't finished. I'm assuming it's very incredible. But the
Yeah,
book
that's with Julie Harris, and she was actually on the podcast just recently. So
yes,
you hear
yes,
more about that. Her episode likely aired before this one, but yeah, she's great.
great, yes.
Go ahead. Go on. Sorry.
But yes, it's a very straightforward guide, if you will, of how to
Yeah.
figure out what percentage should you be putting away for your practice. And it is a way that I think can be very, very helpful for people to feel a little bit more confident of I do have enough put away. And there's some safeguards in that book too, in case something does happen or your practice grows more than you thought it did, or whatever's the reason. You had less
Yeah.
expenses this year, whatever's the reason that's causing that gap. And that is a book that really helped me feel more confident of we've got to be pretty close here in what we're paying. But that was a pretty scary time and some sacrifice, of course, as you can hear that went into was a lot of money very quickly that needed to be
Yeah.
sent. So
Yeah, I'm a huge Profit First fan. That was actually really helpful for me to read. And I'm sure many people that are listening have read it or have heard of it. And Michael Michalowicz, which I love his books are very like practical, in the trenches, kind of simplifies things very well, very well. And I remember reading that book and like that was like I felt so much peace kind of like after I kind of got that in place and started using that structure. Because, like you said, there's this fear like, am I saving enough? Am I paying myself too much or too little? And it gives you these percentages for the buckets of things you need to put money to. So, like every dollar that comes into your business, you're assigning it a percentage, to save for these things. And so it's super helpful. So, I highly recommend Profit First.
Yeah. I thought it was helpful as well. I think they call them target allocations.
Yeah. Yep.
I might
Hmm.
be okay. And what was helpful with that was for me to see, am I close to where I should be? So for the expenses, there's a target for what you spend in expenses. And so am I way off on that? Am I pretty close to it? And it was helpful to gain some confidence in what I'm doing is way off or what I'm doing is close to this guide.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the next mistake? What are we up to? Four?
We're at four. Yep, I have
Okay.
two left.
Cool.
We are an insurance-based practice, and so my fourth one is not preparing for deductible season. So
Mm,
anybody in insurance-based practices, there's typically January 1st, people's policies renew, which also resets their deductible, which a deductible has to be paid before insurance is going to pay you anything. So I feel like I understood, hey, there's this deductible thing coming up. What I didn't understand was kind of step two and three from that. So typically what happens with an insurance-based practice is some people are in deductible, some people aren't. So you're billing some people an amount, but also insurance is paying you an amount. During deductible season, I call it, like the first
hmm
3 months of the year, insurance is paying you nothing and you are billing your clients. And so you are potentially going to receive very, very little from insurance or clients in your first month or two of the year. And so that's a preparation that can last a period of time where you're going to have to plan to float through it. So, in my last tip of not preparing for taxes, you can hear December I had to take no paycheck, which then meant we went into deductible season starting in January. So,
Ouch.
yes, yes. And, it all evens out in the end because then payments start coming through and people are paying for their sessions. But it is a area where you need to have a life vest to float through it a little bit.
Right. Right. Yeah. So what are some of the things you do to prepare for that? Are you kind of adjusting those profit first, like saving for it, stuff like that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do is I try to get the big expenses that I have for different parts of the year. So our most robust time, if you will, financially, is going to be like your March through around August. So any of the big expenses that I have, so rent, for example, is a big expense. We'll pay a couple of months rent in those months instead of having rent due in December or January.
Hmm.
Another thing we've done is added more savings during those months. So then there's more savings available if needed for these months as well. We've implemented processes of making sure that copays are taken at every time of session, for example. So there is still something coming in.
Hmm.
But just that preparation of, I think the biggest piece is knowing this is coming. So then we can prepare the rest of the year for it.
Yeah, that's great. Very smart. All right. Mistake number five. What's the
Five.
last one? Take us home.
Last but not least, hiring the wrong people and firing too slowly.
Oh, okay.
So I have it broken down into two categories. So hiring the wrong people, I have alluded throughout this podcast of just some questioning myself or not having some of the
Hmm.
confidence that I wish I had had. And during early on hiring, and I still find this happening to myself sometimes because I'm human, is I would get intimidated of clinicians that were in the field longer than me, had more knowledge of me than I did.
Mm.
Anything like that, I would start to get kind of intimidated and like, how can I coach someone or
Hmm.
supervise someone or hire someone who knows better than I do? And saying that out loud sounds ridiculous. When you're in the situation, it can feel really big. Like, this person has 30 years of experience. I have 10. They
Hmm.
know way more than
Right.
me. And
Yeah.
it was hard for me to flip the like looking at, well, it's not all about me teaching them, they teach me too. Everybody
Right.
teaches each other every day and really sitting with those people of like, hey, how can I help instead of feeling like I have to know more or be different or, you know, but it's a place internally that I really have to work on and have had to work on. But I think I missed hiring opportunities because of it, where I was
Yeah.
just too intimidated.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, that's just, another place where our stuff can get in the way. I totally resonate with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe this podcast episode should have been labeled How Our Stuff Gets in the Way.
Right, right.
Because I feel
Stuff
like it's a
stuff
theme.
creates mistakes.
Yes. Yeah.
Take care of
It's
your stuff.
so true. And then the second piece of this was firing too slowly. So I think this has become more and more talked about, and nobody wants to let anybody go. And
Yeah.
I think many times our therapist heart, but even people who aren't therapists, we don't want to see people fail. And
Yeah.
I think that I have allowed things to go on for too long or didn't address things quick enough and created probably a bigger issue than it needed to be. And there was a lot of self-doubt that came with that. Like, am I making this bigger than it actually is? And
Hmm.
have I coached them enough? And so I think firing too slowly, and we have not let many people go. There have been a couple though. And afterwards, I think it becomes apparent the emotional toll that perhaps has um, been created, or what the environment looks like
Yeah.
for allowing somebody to stay for too long. And that's kind of the heartbreaking piece when the person's
Right.
gone and the rest of the staff is now like too scared to speak up, or making comments of like, well, I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to get in trouble. And it's like, gosh, you would not get in trouble. People make
Mm.
mistakes, but then realizing that perhaps the environment or culture was really hurt by not letting somebody go sooner. So kind of a heartbreaking one. Nobody likes to let people go. I can't imagine, but
Yeah.
I would say less financially impactful, incredibly emotionally impactful, which of course, does lead to financial struggles as well, long
Yeah,
term. But
absolutely. And it can take so much of your focus and energy to try to continue to coach somebody through something, trying to bring them to whatever it is, your standards or yeah, I've gone through a similar situation and I've only had to fire one person. Luckily, like
yes,
we got some great people, but yeah, it's just kind of, most people's hearts is to see them succeed and,
yes,
and also you don't want to have like knee-jerk reactions. So you're like, oh, am I overthinking this too much? Are they really underperforming? Oh, it's not that big of an impact. And then when you do finally make that change, then it's like, oh, wow, yeah, okay, I can kind of see a little more clearly now that this
yes.
wasn't a good fit and we're kind of in a better place. And we also want the other, the person who's let go to succeed, ultimately, and maybe that means succeeding somewhere else.
Yes, yes, I agree with you. And sometimes some of the logistics get to feel really big for me. Like an example is when we credential with insurance companies, one of the questions they ask is about if a person's ever been involuntarily terminated, and also
Mhm.
any gaps of employment. And so my heart just breaks of like, gosh, am I putting that person in a pickle for their next position, you know?
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think we all have places that we will succeed and we will do great. And so I never want to hurt a person's ability to do that in the future. And also holding that like, but you can't be here.
Yeah. 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 Wow. Well, thank you so much, Brittany, for just kind of opening up your story a little bit, sharing some of these mistakes. I think that they're super helpful, and I think that people listening will just, really probably grab onto at least one or more of these to apply to their own practice. And before we hop off, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the resources you have, and I know you kind of talked early on about getting consultation and supervision. And I do agree with you. I think a lot of these mistakes can be avoided if we've got proper, supervision. So I know you have resources and things for that. So why don't you just share away?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for allowing me the space to share.
Yeah.
So one of the businesses that I have is called the Solace Code Directory, and it is a directory of therapists, so marriage and family therapists, counselors, social workers who offer consultation and supervision services. And it is a great place to go because you'll see pictures for bios. You'll be able to see, do they provide supervision or consultation? And then you get to know a little bit about them. So some of those fears I had early on of, are my questions on point, or is this person kind? Are they going to receive this
Hmm.
really well? the directory allows you to go on and get a feel for that consultant or supervisor, whichever one you're looking for, and see if you're a good fit. So, kind of similar to a directory for finding a therapist, this is for therapists to find supervision and consultation services. And my hope is to fill that gap of fear that probably stops a lot of people from seeking consultation services.
Yeah.
My hope is also to fill that gap for supervision because I think similar things happen. A lot of us end up in an agency where there's one supervisor and we may or may not be getting supervision. And to find a supervisor that really aligns with the clientele we want to see or the modalities that we want to use. And so
Yeah.
you can even search that directory by therapeutic intervention. You're looking for an EMDR supervisor or a supervisor who works with kids instead of adults. And so the Solace Co directory is where you can find that.
Awesome. And we will put links to that in the show notes for this episode so people can find you. Really appreciate it, Brittany. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, one quick thing.
Yeah.
I do have a code for 3 free months for the
Oh, great.
listeners as
Great. Yeah,
well.
share that.
And it is just the word free and three. So free three will give you
Great.
3 free months on the directory if you just enter that in the discount code box at checkout.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Nice chatting with you too.